Okay.
Good afternoon from Columbia University in the city of New York. My name is Tanya Domi, and I am a professor with the Harriman Institute's Balkan Studies program. The Harriman Institute at Columbia University is one of the world's leading academic institutions for the study of Russia, Eurasia, and East Central Europe. Today, Harriman is co-convening our symposium, Combating Holocaust Distortion and Genocide Denial Through Memory Activism is the title of this panel. The panel follows previous panel and a symposium that was led with keynote remarks by Professor Menachem Rosensaft. We are co-convening with Queensborough's Community College Cooperberg Holocaust Center, led by my colleague, Executive Director, Dr. Laurie Cohen. This is our second and final panel today, and I would like the audience to submit comments or questions in the chat. And when our panelists have finished doing their presentations, we will open it up for, I hope, an interesting conversation. Our first panelist, and I'd like to welcome Tali Nates, who's the founder and executive director of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, to be our first panelist and give your presentation. We're all very excited about hosting you here at Harriman.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Tanya and Laura, for the kind invitation. It is really wonderful to join you today from Johannesburg, South Africa. And I thought that what I'll do in my 6-7 minutes is to wear my practitioner hat. I am a founder and director of a museum. I'm also a chair of a few museums in South Africa. And we are a country that is confronting, of course, our own difficult past. So how do you look at memory activism in a museum setting, in a memorial setting? And how do you look at challenges around Holocaust distortion, genocide denial, also in a museum setting? And of course, 80 years after the Holocaust, almost there, when the words never again were used for the first time, we recognize that genocides happen again and again. And of course, the words of Auschwitz survivor and author Primo Levi are very critical to reflect on. And of course, he said it happened, therefore it can happen again. This is the core of what we have to say. It can happen, and it can happen everywhere. And memorials and museums are reflecting and should reflect on this repetitive pattern of genocide, that it's not happening exactly the same, but it's happening again and again. It's interesting, but the latest 2021 survey of trust in museums shows that museums are the most highly trusted source of information. Maybe it will surprise you. History museums are trusted up to 78 to 80% trust, much more than the media that is down at 50s and 60%. Now, in a world, and we spoke about that in previous panels, in a world where there is an assault on truth, there is an assault on history, where nationalism, illiberal democracies, and populism is growing, this is an important role for museums and memorials, not only to remember, but to honor, to use wisely, not to distort the truth ourselves. Of course, when we look at denial and distortion, there are many, many challenges. And let me touch one or two of them that were not touched in panels before. And that is the passing of the survivors' generation. The witnesses of the atrocities, certainly in the case of the Holocaust, but also in other genocides. If you talk about Cambodia, for example, survivors are passing. And those survivors played an important role for so many years in sharing their painful memories with us, and also were important in education. Michael Berenbaum reminds us that we are moving from a period of living memory to one of historical memory. And memorials and museums had to develop different tools to counter that. Films, books. I will share later in the chat some of the resources that are out there, the new technologies that are used, the US Seashore Foundation using the Dimensions in Testimony, where survivors are answering questions asked by audiences using the latest technology. And these are some of the tools that we are using to counter denial and distortion through testimony. Of course, Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel said, when you listen to a witness, you become a witness. So we are in a period where the witnesses who listened for many years to the survivors are now the ones that are sharing the stories and the warnings. Now, I'm coming to you from South Africa. So the question I want to ask is, how is the Holocaust or genocide in Srebrenica or in Armenia or in Rwanda is remembered in countries that are far away from the events themselves? In the case of the Second World War in the Holocaust, we are very much far away from the events. So can it act as an entry point to make connections to issues society is dealing with in those countries? And in that, I want to connect to memory activism. Now, if we look at South Africa, in 2007, the Holocaust became a compulsory topic in the curriculum for both grade 9 and then for grade 11. So it's 15, 17 years old. In the case of grade 11, it's for those that are choosing history, because we don't have to choose history in South Africa for our final exam. So including study of the Holocaust and of genocide in a national curriculum, training teachers in how to teach about it, creating reliable resources to support the teaching, ensuring that there are university departments that teach and research about this is crucial to make sure denial and distortion cannot win. So I'm coming from a museum, as I said before. Development of museums, of memorials is critical for education and memory. And that does not happen in every society, in every country. In our case, our center that was only opened in 2019 chose to look at genocide in the 20th century. We do look at the Holocaust and at the genocide in Rwanda as the main case studies, but we look at genocide and case studies throughout the 20th century. And the importance is to look at memory, but to also look at education, to have a space for dialogue, and to learn lessons and make connections. So museums should adopt a human rights approach that promotes social justice, cultural diversity, and inclusive society to facilitate opportunities to develop critical citizenship skills. And throughout our exhibition, for example, throughout our educational programs, we make connections to South Africa, to our own past, to our own present of human rights abuses. And we admit that this country is struggling with the legacy of colonialism, of apartheid, but also struggling with human rights abuses now. Xenophobia, racism is really a problem in today's South Africa. So history is used as an entry point to allow us to reflect on our own painful history. We also look at developing critical thinking skills. So beyond talking about history, what happened, when, where, we look at encouraging visitors to make connections between memories of the past and the challenges of society today. So you connect between memory and activism today. Throughout, for example, the exhibition and our programs, we look at voices of survivors, at victims, at resistors, at rescuers, at bystanders, and others. Now, I want to connect to today's world and to the war in Ukraine and Russia. Currently, South Africa claimed neutrality on the Russian war against Ukraine. And in fact, that neutrality is a position of a bystander. I don't have time to talk about it. I can speak about it more later on in the discussion. Now, we have to teach that the bystander always assists the perpetrator, never the victim, by standing by and not getting involved. Again, let me quote Primo Levi that said, in spite of the varied possibilities for information, most Germans didn't know because they didn't want to know, because indeed they wanted not to know. So we need to want to know. And we spoke about that quite a lot in the panel before. So students, educators need to be sensitized to human rights and memory activism. Let me give you a quick example. In one of the programs that we did, we use a lot of survivors' testimonies, and one such survivor, Xavier from Rwanda, went to schools and spoke about his experiences. He also disclosed that he does not know where his parents are buried. The students decided immediately to collect money, send him back to Rwanda. He went to the Gacaca, he found out where his parents are buried, he exhumed the bodies, gave them a proper burial. And this is a chain of from memory to activism. And those examples are many. One more thing before I end is that the importance is also to use history to translate it to issues not only in South Africa, but for example, in the African continent. So to connect between history, for example, Holocaust, or Rwanda, or apartheid, or any other history, and encourage making your own case study and investing in your own case study. We have a program that goes through Africa and is now in 13 countries in Africa, where we encourage to create your own case study. So finally, museums and memorials need to be spaces of memory activism to encourage active citizenship, empathy, and personal responsibility. We should be places where lessons about choices, striving to become upstanders and not bystanders, are lived. And that is our challenge and our task, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you, Tali, very much. Very interesting. I can't wait to have this conversation. Our next presenter and panelist is Paul Lowe, an award-winning photojournalist. Okay, somebody has...
That's me. I'm doing that.
I know it is, but I can't read my...
Oh, I'm sorry.
My introduction. Can you give me a second here? Sorry. Paul Lowe, award-winning photojournalist who covered the 1992 through 1995 Bosnian War and post-war situation in BIH, and a course leader of the master's program in photojournalism and documentary photography at the London College of Communication, University of the Arts in London, UK. It's my pleasure and my honor to introduce Paul, who has been exhibiting his work from the war and during this past week of remembrance of 30 years ago when the war began in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Over to you, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tanya, for that. And thank you very much for this invitation. Can everybody see the screen okay? See the picture there?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about photography, and I think it follows on very well from what we were just discussing there about the idea of witnessing. I think, I want to maintain that a photograph is a form of witness, and it has multiple levels of witnessing, because there's obviously the photographer that takes the photograph is the witness of the whatever the scene's in front of them. But I think the photograph itself then becomes a witness in its, and also the way the photograph is then disseminated, distributed, shared is a form of bearing witness. So I think there are multiple levels of witnessing. But I'm also very interested in the way that photographs of objects and things can carry some of this presence of the people that owned them and the life that they lead. And I think it's a very powerful way to connect with people, because I think sometimes in images of atrocity and war crimes and genocide, the very brutal images, although we do need to see them occasionally, can be too difficult to engage with. And I think objects and things are a different way, this sort of anthropomorphic way to connect. So I'm just going to show a couple of case studies of work of photographers who've used this strategy, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about my own photography as well towards the end. So this is a series of pictures by Zia Gafic, who is a Bosnian photographer who was a young child and teenager during the siege of Sarajevo and lived through that as a refugee himself. And he's gone on to become one of the most significant and important photographers in documenting the post-war, post-conflict life in Bosnia and indeed in other post-conflict societies as well. But in about 5 years ago, he did an incredible body of work called Quest for Identity, where he very painstakingly and carefully photographed hundreds, if not thousands, of objects that were kept in the Podgorican identification project in Tuzla. And these are the personal effects left behind by the victims of Srebrenica. They were exhumed from the graves and they were presented as evidence as part of the collection of data and evidence around the crime of Srebrenica. And every body that was recovered, the pockets were gone through very painstakingly, and the contents were placed into plastic evidence bags and obviously aligned with the body. And they were used in identification purposes as well, as a way to try and allow families to see if they could work out which body was which, very sadly. But he's created this incredible catalog, a kind of typography or typology of these very everyday, very ordinary objects that were carried in people's pockets. And the idea that you would take your house key with you, implies that you would want to go back. And you didn't really think that you would be murdered and executed and then dumped into a shallow grave, and then your body moved to another grave later on in a secondary grave. So they're very, very powerful symbols, I think, of the humanity that was lost in Srebrenica. And Zia's produced a book of this work. He also produced a website which allows for victims' families to try to access these objects more easily than having to go to the center directly to see them. And they're all photographed on the mortuary table in the same style, this kind of very objective, very sort of cool approach, really. But they do create, I think, this incredible testament to the lives, the lived experience, the lives that were lost. And they carry the passage of time embedded in the pictures. If you look at these glasses that were repaired and fixed over days and weeks and months, they actually tell the story of the siege of Srebrenica, because these are objects that had to be repaired and fixed because they couldn't be replaced by just going to the drugstore and buying a new one. This is a series of pictures by Armin Durgut called Mrtvare, which are the names, which is means dead shoes. And these are a collection of the shoes that were recovered by the team from the Srebrenica Memorial Center from the Trail of Death, this horrific route from Srebrenica through to Tuzla, where thousands of Bosnian men and women and children tried to escape from the massacre sites. And unfortunately, many of them were killed by Serbian paramilitaries on that route as they tried to escape through the hills and mountains. And these shoes lay in the forest, rotting away until they were very carefully collected by the team from the Memorial Center and then put into storage. And then Armin was then asked to photograph them to create a testament to these very personal objects. And I think Emir Sulagis just made a very important point today, talking exactly about these images when he was showing it to the current new US ambassador, that none of them are military shoes. They're all, as you can see here, dress shoes, sneakers, women's shoes, and they've been preserved in this extraordinary state in the archives and now presented in the museum. So Armin did this incredible book called Mrtvare, just by, again, very painstakingly photographing them. And obviously the shoe is one of the tropes of genocide and Holocaust memorialization. And I think it does give a very, very powerful lived experience, because these shoes are worn, they've taken on the shape of their owner, they've taken on the life of their owner in some way. And then they also obviously have been then affected by time as they've been left to rot as a symbol of the destruction of the people that owned them. This is a project by Shannon Jensen, who is a young American photographer who was covering the refugee situation in Sudan and after the genocide in Darfur. And it's an example, again, of how a slightly different perspective on a story can engage audiences. Shannon had been photographing the refugee crisis there photographing the people moving, and she wasn't getting the pictures published. It was the sort of typical photographs that we expect of refugees queuing for food and being displaced. But editors were saying, well, we've seen this all before. You know, this representation, this kind of trope, we've seen before. We can't really talk about it again. And so what she did is she realized that these refugees were carrying the shoes that they were wearing were a very, very powerful symbol of the journey that they'd taken to try to get to relative safety. So she did this extraordinary set of photographs simply by asking people to take their shoes off and to photograph them. And it became viral. It was very successful. It was published very, very widely. So just a sense of changing that register a little bit, that visual register, led to the images, you know, really being much more publicized than they would have been otherwise. And I myself have photographed shoes as part of the work that I did on the search for the missing in post-war Bosnia. I was very struck. I photographed the conflict here, but I was also very struck with the lack of coverage that the post-war situation got. And this is one of the big issues that we have to confront. Very often the media's attention is really drawn to conflicts when they're hot, as it were, but then afterwards, the scars, the traces that are left behind are really underreported. And this, as we know, is the picture that we used to publicize the event. It's the clothes of a Bosnian family that were killed by their Serb neighbors and buried and then exhumed by the team. And they've been left out in the sun to dry, to be allowed them to then be sort of very carefully admitted as evidence of the deaths of their owners in a small village in eastern Bosnia. And this is the identification process. When they recover a body from the grave, they lay it out and they're very painstakingly and carefully with the forensic anthropologist and the doctor and the lawyer, make sure that all of the bones have been recovered and lay them out very carefully. So as Tanya alluded to there, my own work from the siege of Sarajevo has just been exhibited in Belgrade at the Center for Decontamination. Thanks very much for doing that as well to Velma, who's going to be talking soon from the PCRC, to Forum ZFD, and also to the Srebrenica Memorial Center, who were all instrumental in making this happen. It was a very moving experience to show the work in Belgrade. We had a very good turnout for the exhibition. But I was really struck. I mean, firstly, it was very gratifying that a good number of people came out, very supported by the photography community there, obviously, but also by the youth, some of the youth groups in Belgrade who came. But I was really struck in a very sort of depressing and sad way by talking to those youth. And this is what I'll close on, because I think it's a really important issue for us to debate here today. That many of them told me the same story. I spoke to several different people in their 20s and 30s who said that until they were in their 20s, it wasn't that the siege of Sarajevo was denied, or it wasn't that the claims of Muslims killing themselves were celebrated. They didn't even know there had been a siege of Sarajevo. So these are educated citizens of Serbia, Belgrade residents who've been to school, been to university, and that entire period it wasn't that it was denied, it was simply wiped out. It just wasn't, like it didn't exist. It wasn't even referred to. And so I find that a really extraordinary thing to imagine, that a country that neighbors a country that's gone through a genocide, that was complicit in that played a part in that the youth of that country can get to the age of 20 and not even know that this happened, never mind deny it. And I think that's a very sad point that I'll leave on for now. And I've got some other things I'd like to come back to later on, but for now, I'll leave it there. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paul. So it is my pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Velma Sadic, the founder and president of the Sarajevo-based Post-Conflict Research Center and founder and editor-in-chief of the Balkan Discourse Program. And full disclosure, I am president of the Advisory Council of PCRC, which has indeed been my honor and pleasure to have worked with Velma all these years. And Velma and I discussed this symposium, and I began planning last year in collaboration with her. So I give her due credit. So you have the floor, Velma.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Thank you so much for putting this together. It's always a pleasure to brainstorm our ideas and then came up with something amazing like how we did Roma last year. And I'm always grateful to Harman Institute, to you, to Lori, And it's a great privilege to be in such a great panel with the friends and colleagues who I know for many years. I'm going to speak from the perspective of Post-Conflict Research Center and how we actually came out with some new ways of commemorating and new ways of memorialization of the previous events and war during the Bosnian war and former Yugoslavia conflict. So looking back, the genocide that took place in Bosnia in the 1990s, we have benefit of seeing clearly how step by step the policies, plans, and actions leading to genocide are constructed. And we did learn how to better equip our society, especially youth groups, with the knowledge and tools necessary to prevent these events happening in the future. We do work a lot in a peace education, and we do work a lot with the youth, but that is not only primary work we did through years. I can say proudly that now Post-Conflict Research Center does exist for almost 20 years. If we include the work I did 10 years previously, then I founded Post-Conflict Research Center at the Hague Tribunal as a court reporter, gaining a lot of knowledge about the Hague archives and the legacy of International Tribunal for former Yugoslavia, and incorporating the legacy in some of our educational programs and projects. So regarding the memorialization, we did a lot in these previous 10 years, 11, as long we exist as an organization, but having in mind that initiatives that include remembrance and memorialization efforts are really problematic in Bosnia and in the region of former Yugoslavia, since from the 1995, the whole region in Bosnia started to recover from the horrors of war. Many forms of commemoration and memorialization were developed. Concerning the genocide happened in Srebrenica, we do have many unsolved issues we heard today during the seminar, especially genocide denial. I'm not going to repeat anything from that because we heard great presentations and some of our Bosnian fellows, colleagues speak about that, especially Hikmet and Rialda. But for us, we do see that there is many unsolved issues still exist regarding commemoration efforts in Bosnia, with a full scale of denial, of course, of the crimes of the Srebrenica genocide. And this also leads into the major problem we have regarding the law. We don't have a state law which will regulate how we will commemorate the past. We don't have a state law which will actually provide us a legal frame and to put all these commemorations and memorialization efforts into the larger spectrum. So this means that literally anybody in our country, through permission of the municipality mayor, can go and build a memorial or monument with no educational background incorporated, without deeper thinking about how much this will harm future generations, without even considering how much is important actually to commemorate on an appropriate way and not to insult and not to insult any more victims and survivors than they are. So in our case, we work a lot through non-formal education. There is a lot of projects and exhibitions we curated and we are exhibiting. Professor Polo just showed one portion of projects we did for Srebrenica Genocide Memorial, which actually Armin Durgut took photos of these shoes, but we did also together document these objects being found as a part of a dead march, as they call this July, a movement of the men from Srebrenica. So these shoes and a bunch of other objects being found, they've been documented, labeled, and archived in the Srebrenica Genocide Memorial, and we did that together with Srebrenica Genocide Memorial. I mean, we do have a memorandum of understanding, and we did move a lot from non-formal education into looking the way how we will commemorate with the state institutions and how we will develop programs which will actually benefit. We heard from Tali how strong and how much impact museums have. And we do understand through our work that museums and especially Srebrenica Genocide Memorial Museum, which is only state memorial museum existing in a country, not by the willingness of our local politicians, but through a special push of a high representative, late Pedi Ashdown. Srebrenica Genocide Memorial does exist. Through Memorandum of Understanding, we do develop a majority of educational programs. So one of them is our Srebrenica Youth School. This year we will have a third edition, where we gather regional youth from the region of former Yugoslavia on 7 days long program, educational program. But beside the fact that they can learn from academia and journalists and civil society and survivors, they can also spend some time in museum, and they can also spend some time in Srebrenica, and they can see a daily struggle of people who return and actually see how life is going on in these cities, still suffering and recovering from the consequences of genocide. On another hand, we do work a lot on archiving. I just mentioned one portion, and on developing the artistic approach toward commemoration. Commemorating the 25th anniversary of Srebrenica genocide together with Memorial and the Bosnian artist Aida Šejbović, who is living in New York City. We did brought this nomadic monument of the cups of coffees or filđans što te nema. During that time, the commemoration was really jeopardized by COVID, and we really did realize that we need to develop new innovative approaches toward commemoration. And that through this way, we can include larger number of public, not just those who will be present, but during the COVID, we had a really limited number of people who could be there. So we did use a lot social media, we did use a lot our networking, and we successfully commemorate 25th anniversary of Srebrenica genocide. On another hand, our work goes into coalition and partnerships through the world. So Tali is here, but I'm going to mention how actively we have been working together in coalition together. We remember last 2 years during the COVID pandemic, where we were networking with institutions and museums who commemorate genocide and Holocaust through the world. And we were developing the month during the April, we were commemorating genocide and Holocaust through the world. So these are some of the ways of, I don't know how I'm with time, I will stop soon. But these are some of the ways how we actually trying to commemorate and work. We work closely also with the Jewish community. My colleague Ellie is here, and I'm really happy we have a project together, Holocaust and Peace, which is actually educational curriculum we were developing 3 years with our partners from the Washington, D.C. Educators for Human Rights and the German organization here in Bosnia for that. So this educational manual, which we were working on together with the teachers and professors through the country from all ethnic and religious groups, actually is now educational material which we will try to incorporate into educational curriculum through Bosnia. So a lot of our work is innovative, a lot of our work is using art, and we do see that these are new ways of commemorating and developing approachable materials, especially for young generations, using a lot of social and digital media. And I stop here and I leave some more space for conversation.
Thank you so much, Velma. Our last speaker is Eli Tauber, who's an author, historian, and president of Haggadah Sarajevo, an organization established for preserving Jewish culture and tradition in Bosnia and Herzegovina. He is also the director of the Archive of the Jewish Community. Eli, welcome to Harriman Institute.
Thank you, thank you. I want to say Eli instead Eli, but it's the same.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, I'm just want to explain how actually I'm thinking about Holocaust, about what side has Holocaust, not just negative sides, like we all the time talking about, victims, about what happened and many crimes against humanity. And so I think it's very important that also talk with about people, brave people who saved Jews or others during World War II. And from this, actually, I started at the beginning, more than 20 years ago, because I met somebody, some woman, she saved my mother during World War II. Actually, he came to Sarajevo and took her from Sarajevo to Mostar, but it was, Italian occupation army, but they actually saved Jews. But what's important, actually, she's called me. I was in this time. At this time, I was in Israel. She called me and said, "I want to see you because I saved your mother." And from this idea, when I back to Bosnia and starting to make a deep research about the people who saved Jews during World War II, actually I had the idea that I'm talking not just about victims, because for me in this moment it was very important to talk about those brave people who saved Jews and other peoples, and they risk their own life, to save some other life. Okay, it was the idea at the beginning. It was, well, I remember that we organized some biennial about genocide in Sarajevo and Holocaust too. And I spoke about, Jewish community and their role in saving life from the life of the citizens of Sarajevo, and how they help Jewish community to the Sarajevo citizens. But in the same time, I started to work before this conference, to work on the researching people who saved Jews during World War II. And it was, a large number of the people. I didn't know how many I have. I collected all of them that I collaborated with the Yad Vashem. It was a database to get the database of all of those people. And I found that we had, in this moment, it was 25 stories about people who saved Jews. It means 33 or 34 writers among the nations. But in continuing my work, the numbers started to grow up. And at the end, today we have 54 writers among the nations in Bosnia. But this is not final number, because I made some more interviews, about maybe 50 interviews. And now we have a list of people that we are going to promote them, and that they can get the Medal of Honor of Yad Vashem for their risking life in saving Jews. I wrote a book. The title of the book is When the Neighbors Were Real Human Beings. My idea is to talk about neighbors, because in Bosnia, neighbors is so high category, and we are talking about those. We are not talking about people next door. We are talking about people who know each other, that they want to help each other. I'm not talking about some cases during this recent war, but I'm talking about that existed in those kind of people. They are ready to risk their own life to save some human beings. And this case is what I made research. It was excellent examples how people were ready to risk their own life. And we are talking, for instance, we are talking about Dervish Korkut, who was the curator of National Museum of Bosnia, and he saved well-known Sarajevo Agada, and it was very risky to take from the museum and to bring out of the museum during the war, and saved because some German officers came to take this Haggadah from museum. It was very risky. And in the same time, he saved one Jewish family. It was also very important because he was well known in Sarajevo because his somebody who try all time to keep good relations with the Jews, and he actually, like intellectual people, he was invited to write something about Yugoslav Jews, because all intellectuals in Yugoslavia, ex-Yugoslavia, they decided to make a book under the name Our Jews, to explain what Jews they are, how they, what they did in society, and how they were included in day-to-day life. Actually, he wrote about Sarajevo Jews, and at the end of his article, he said, "Oh yes, but we have to Bosnian and Sarajevo Jews. They have to know that they are actually improvised. They are local populations. They are talking that Jews, not some strangers, somebody who has some different religion, but he's something that not belong to Sarajevo. It's a part of Sarajevo, and I have to say that before World War II, Sarajevo was about 12.5 Jews. It's about 20% of all population of Sarajevo in this time, and there were more than 300 companies and stores on the main streets on Sarajevo, and most of the industry of Sarajevo was, I don't want to say Jewish hands. I want to say, Jews invested in some factories and companies and stores that actually they to develop their own city. We have more stories about people who saved Jews that I put it in this book. One is, the man well-known like Bosnian Schindler. He actually risked their own life to go to Zagreb, to independent state of Croatia, to ask from the leaders of Ustaša states to give a possibility that that Jews can get some papers to be regular citizens, not out of any rights. And he get the permission that some 16 families can be converted to Islam or Catholicism, and in this case they will be saved. And he decided to find 16 numbers families with a huge number of members, and so at the end it was 100 people that he actually saved. And they get regular papers, and mostly of them with this paper leave Tuzla to Sarajevo, from Sarajevo to Mostar, and they were actually at the end saved. My idea is to talk with these people, to collect all that belong to them, from the biography to the photos of each one, and find new one. The idea is not just to sit and wait to come to you all those facts. Actually, I announced I made a movie. I'm talking about it that like some of way how we can be active. And I made a movie, some short movie about documentary advertising movie, how we can invite people to come and to tell us their story. And not just this, I made some articles in newspapers, some feuilletons, and the people came and asked how they can help, and they came to tell their story. And now we have, new 50 cases righteous about the nations, and we want to promote them and to send some application to Yad Vashem, and to ask from that to nominate people to get a Medal of Honor of Yad Vashem. Because I don't know, about 20 years I'm in this case of Holocaust and researching, and I made my PhD on Holocaust in Bosnia. Idea at the end is what to do with all this, facts, what I've collected, and how we present it. You know that in Bosnia we have no, any education about Holocaust. Of course, that Bosnia signed, some contract agreement that we will be part of it, like many other states in Europe and in the world, but nothing happened. And we are trying to organize, and I led history professors to Paris to Mémoire de la Shoah to teach them how to teach about Holocaust, and that's very important. And after that they came to Bosnia, and also we had the two, seminars in Bosnia, and now we have, 4 seminars, that we get to the professors, but we have no possibility to teach students about it and the pupils. And what we are going to do now in this moment, this is new idea to establish Holocaust Museum in Bosnia. It will be in Sarajevo. It will be in one synagogue. You know that this synagogue not belong to Bosnia, to Jewish community of Bosnia in this moment, because of law or institutional law that we have now in this moment. But it belongs to municipality center Sarajevo, and they decided to give us for museum, to transfer, their rights to our foundation, that we can establish our museum. What's important in this museum, it's not, some huge museum. This is a small synagogue, few hundred square meters only. But the idea is that this synagogue, this museum, Holocaust Museum, will be a place from where we are teach people how to teach, first of all, about Holocaust and other genocides, not just Holocaust, and to get there many materials about it, that they get, some videos, some photos, some facts, and that they can, with the knowledge that they can get from us, and they can continue to teach students. And now we, because idea is not just to teach, idea is to I can say, put in the hand something that people knows that it's impossible to be bystander. That they have to be active, they have to be involved, and they have to know that what's wrong, what is not wrong, and they are ready also to risk their own life to save some other life if we are talking about somebody who is the right person. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellie. So I want to open this up to our audience. But I see several themes. I think Tali's point on museums having great credibility is quite interesting. as you said, Tali, that this, we're under assault, and yet museums hold a great deal of credibility. That's very interesting. The other point, it seems like, is that museums can be convening areas for education, but also activism. And that's also very heartening. Your story about the students collecting money so this person could go back and find his family members and bury them appropriately. That's very moving. So I think the idea of education in general is a way to educate everybody about what actually happened, which is in fact, I call it a prebuttal to genocide denial and Holocaust distortion. So I invite our audience to ask some questions, and I want to also invite into this conversation my colleague, Dr. Laura Cohen, so she can join.
Thank you so much, Tanya. I also just wanted to say I'm so grateful to be in this conversation with all of you. And Tali and Tanya, you just mentioned this as well, the credibility of museums. And I was also just thinking about, though, and Velma, Ellie, and Paul, you've talked about just how challenging it is to do this work on the ground in Bosnia. And I was just thinking about if you're developing a Holocaust museum in Sarajevo in particular, there's the Museum of Sarajevo, there's the Tunnel Museum, but I think at one point there was also like a Crimes Against Humanity Museum. And so there's not necessarily, some of the museums do a better job of talking about the history than others. Some of the museums, it's questionable who's running them and for what purpose. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the challenge of having a Holocaust memorial in a city where the history of the Holocaust and the history of the wars is complicated at best.
So was that directed to somebody specific, Laura? I could maybe speak a little bit to it.
To all of you.
Yeah. Sarajevo has become a very interesting case study in how the past is caught in a city like this between the sort of dark tourism aspect of becoming a site that people are interested in visiting because of its history and because it was a site of conflict, and the complications and the contested histories that then has to tell. And as you said, the main national museum, the National Museum of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which was previously the Museum of the Revolution under the partisan period, actually legally doesn't exist. So the one museum that does have a sort of state level, national level mission has an exhibition about the siege of Sarajevo called Besieged Sarajevo. According to the way the Dayton Agreement was signed, it's a national level institution in a country that has no national level operations. And that's true of 7 different national level museums, including the kind of the History Museum, the Zamajski Museum, Museum of Literature, the National Museum of Art, and so on. So you've got this state level institutions that have no state and therefore have no funding and therefore are having to scrabble around as best they can to create things. And then you have this whole sort of layer of essentially private or NGO museums and sites of memory that have opened up in all sorts of different ways, some of which, as you said, are extremely well done and very professionally run and properly run, some of which are kind of cottage industry, homemade, with potentially dubious financial situations and so on in terms of who's profiting from them. So it is a very difficult and contested space, but equally, clearly people are coming to Sarajevo to engage with that history and commemorate it, pay witness to it, and they are genuinely interested in it. So it is a very interesting but very complicated and very difficult space to operate within. And I think obviously Ellie's initiative is a fantastic one, and I think it's something that it's a really untold story in many ways. The complexity of the Jewish population of Sarajevo, what's happened to them over history, and how they came here initially, and how they were then such a huge part of the life of the city until the Second World War and the role they played in the more recent conflict and so on. But it's in a way, Sarajevo is a kind of case study or test bed for the complexities of contested memory. And how to try to deal with that. And I think it's something really, really difficult. I don't have a direct answer for you, but I do know that it's a very difficult space. just coming back from Belgrade, it was very interesting talking to youth activists there, that it's in a sense the opposite there, because there are no state-led institutions that in any way, shape or form engage with the past in this way. And it's down to much smaller organizations like the Centre for Decontamination of Culture and the work of the Youth Initiative for Human Rights are doing to try to create spaces where the past can be talked about and dealt with and thought through and explored. So I think the whole, and then, in Croatia and in Zagreb, these museums, what were the Museums of Evolution, only really deal with the Second World War and the partisan period. They make almost no mention of the Yugoslav conflict itself. So it's a very difficult environment to work within, but clearly also a very, very important one, because history here, the past, is absolutely relevant in the present, and the ways in which the past is being manipulated and coerced into new meanings and new, as well as being used in positive ways to increase people's understanding about what happened here. It's a very complex environment to work within, and a very difficult one for sure. So I don't have an answer to you in terms of what museums should do, but it's something that I think we're very, very interested in. It's work that I've got a lot of presence in, which is something that perhaps we could touch on later.
Thank you, Paul. We have a comment and a question from audience member Alicia Hadini. My question is, if education can involve not only a knowledge of the past, but also a way to recognize future ongoing genocide, I think this can play a crucial role, because when international law cannot prevent and repress a genocide, and I am thinking about the case of the Uyghurs of China, close parent, maybe civil society, well-educated people can make a difference. Velma, do you want to respond to that comment and question?
I mean, in our region, in Bosnia especially, that is what civil society is doing right now. And in the last 30 years almost, we have been doing a lot, but it seems that is not enough, having in mind the situation and how more radical and divided our youth are, and how more poisoned they are than, immediately when war ended. So it seems that, the civil society did kind of like try to substitute the gap we had with the formal education, but unfortunately without possibility for us, civil society and educators, to go to the classrooms and teach young people and teach youth about at least peace education and the genocide and mass atrocity prevention. It seems that regionally we don't see a lot of progress. So there is also a need to work together hand by hand. We as a civil society, there is a lot of different organizations existing in the region. And according to some data, we in Bosnia had more than 20,000 civil society organizations, sometimes being even established by politicians, just to flow the money and, to follow a certain agenda, and then they would disappear. So the lack in civil society is also really questionable in our region. So without a formal education, it's really difficult. I mean, it's a difficult task. So,
do you? I know that you've been involved in developing this Holocaust curriculum, and you've done a lot of work around educating the public in general and youth through the summer program that you do. What do you think it would take for the government to allow a curriculum, for example, and Ellie, you can comment on this as well, a curriculum about the Holocaust, because I do think that is a distant event, but a way into a contemporary conversation about what happened here in the last 30 years. What are your thoughts about that, Velma, and then Ellie, please?
I mean, in our case, definitely these nationalistic politicians who want to keep, on power, they don't see this as something what they need to achieve in their agenda, because then their policy will, and the whole approach they have toward peace would be completely distorted. So in our case, definitely there is, and we did, and Ellie can mention, we had some like briefing with the cantonal ministries, because Bosnia have, the division on 10 cantons and the state level and entity level, for those who don't know. So some of these cantonal ministries of education, they did express interest to see, can they incorporate the Holocaust and Peace manual we have? And that is really encouraging. I think in our case, probably we should lead on these opposition politicians who does see a necessity of educating the youth more than nationalistic politicians. And it would take a lot of pressure, which we would have to put as a civil society together on the systems. We are a country with 186 ministries, but without state ministry for education and the youth policies. So it's something what should be a coordinated action between civil society and academia, and all of us pushing and getting these results.
Sure. Ellie, what are your comments on this?
I think we started to talk with everyone, in Canton Sarajevo, who can be, ready to help us to realize our idea. And we spoke with the mayor of Sarajevo, with the ministries of culture, of education, and also with the chief of some parties, with some chiefs of some parties, and and they are actually all ready to help us. That's excellent. We decided to establish our foundation in Sarajevo, just in Canton Sarajevo, because we knew if we are going to establish this, on the higher level, for instance, federation of all Bosnia, it can be a problem. That somebody can say yes or no, and that will take a time. And we decided to bring the Canton Sarajevo bring some kind of lex specialis, and on this we will, establish in Canton Sarajevo our museum. It's very good because they are all ready to help us. This is the first time that I can say that doesn't matter which parties we are talking in Canton Sarajevo. Everyone is ready to help us and to support us. I'm just spoke with most of them. I have two new appointments and to talk with the leaders of these parties, but this is generally because I know that they are ready to help. For us, it's very important that all delegates in Canton Sarajevo knows that we are going to do some and to develop some good idea. This is not just about Holocaust. This is also about mass atrocity, genocides, everyone, and actually we have worked to establish institution that we can help and to stop every new genocide in our country.
Yes, that's great. I mean, it's great. I've been to the Jewish Museum there, and it's wonderful to hear that there's some support in the canton for this. There's a comment from the audience, and I'm aware of this because I've been involved at PCRC and Forum ZFD and the educators for human rights education based in DC have produced this manual, Holocaust and Peace Lessons for the Past and for the Future. I'm definitely aware of that. The question is, where do you get it into schools, into educational institutions? And maybe you start at the universities. Maybe that's where you can start. I also want to give some credit to Sonia Vilicic in Belgrade, who is the executive director of Haver Friends. And she has been developing an educational curriculum for Serbian schools on the Holocaust and has also hit some dead ends there. Blockages, obviously. Tali, you did share a link with our fellow panelists about the resources of your museum. I would imagine that the period following the end of apartheid was also probably a contested period. How can you maybe share some of your experience and weigh in here on the idea of education into the schools, like as Menachem discussed, the national history of Germany and how that has definitely transformed Germany on the issue of the Holocaust.
And maybe it's really helpful to look beyond Bosnia and to look at post-conflict or post-genocide societies and how difficult it was to speak about the history, confront that history. So if you look at Germany, when did history come into the curriculum? Much later. When did
40 years? Wasn't it 40 years? It was approximately 40 years.
At least 40 years, if not 50. When is the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe is opened in Berlin? In 2005, 60 years after the events of the Holocaust.
Right.
When is Austria looking at its past? Only after the Waldheim affair and so much that was happening, and that is the 1990s. Again, 50 years after the events of the Holocaust, repositioning themselves as co-perpetrators rather than the first victim. So you're looking at processes that are taking many, many years. Sometimes we say we don't have the patience. We don't want to wait 50, 60 years, to get there. But if I look at Rwanda and South Africa as two other cases which are interesting, Rwanda also did not teach history for at least the first 10 years. History was not in the curriculum because which history do you teach? The history of the perpetrators, the history of the victims, the victors, it was so complicated that in the end, 10, 15 years later, the genocide started to be taught as peace education. So more, sort of civic education rather than history education. And even today, it's more peace education, 28 years after the genocide. It's more concentrated on peace, social cohesion, sort of thing, education rather than history education. South Africa is struggling. I must say that we are also 28 years, of course, both countries, April 1994, Rwanda went into genocide. We chose democracy and, of course, Nelson Mandela. And when I think about our struggle with teaching all history, we will choose which history we want to teach. We don't look at all histories, and we sometimes say, let's leave history, and it's not a struggle to look at history and to confront history. There was an interesting question in the chat about then how do you, I think Una asked about how do you get the public to be interested then in history? And maybe I'll start, and then Tanya, maybe the others can chip in.
Sure. I do want to acknowledge Una, who's on faculty at University of California, and I apologize, Una, because I don't remember which campus you're on, but thank you so much for weighing in here. Please go ahead, Tali.
Yeah, I just thought about the importance of going beyond the statistics and going beyond the big numbers and going to individual stories. Paul, I absolutely love these artifacts, these shoes, the watches, the keys. I mean, all of us have keys. The key, the minute I have a key, I think I'm going home, so to connect to these stories, the artifacts, to connect to the arts, music, poetry, photography, theater. I think that is a way in. And I must say that was a way in Rwanda. And it is a way in South Africa in a way to speak about our past. So I just wanted to park that in and to connect maybe to Paul and your work with artifacts.
Yeah, I appreciate you reminding people And I have said this many times too, and there is a new book out by a Holocaust scholar. And I'm sorry, I cannot recall her name, but it's about what can be learned from Germany and its post-war dealing with the Holocaust. And I've been trying to get the book. I actually did get it on my Kindle. It's in the Columbia Library, but it was hard to get because it was that Jewish Theological Seminary. Couldn't get into the library there. Anyway, to make a long story short, there are lessons to be learned here. And I agree with you, Tali, very much that South Africa, Rwanda, and put it into context. I mean, Germany was destroyed by the Holocaust, and it took a very, very long time to recover from it, and has become the most wealthy country in Europe, if not one of the most wealthy countries in the world, notwithstanding its problems. So are there other people who would like to take up the comment from Una on what other ways can children learn and teenagers learn, because it's not in school curriculum? And I think this is a good time, because Andres brought this up. This is a good time, I think, for Velma and Paul, maybe talk about these commemoration events, which were very big. The commemoration of the 30th anniversary of the beginning of the siege, the beginning of the war in Sarajevo, the work that you have been doing, Velma, in exhibitions is education where it's accessible to the public. Why don't you comment on that, and have some other comments on the activities you've been engaged in with regard to the commemoration and your planned activities?
So, I mean, yes, in our case, I just want to mention that Tali really gave a great point. Before we commemorate now Sarajevo siege and 30th anniversary of the beginning of war, we had a peace festival. And actually, as a peace organization, we started to commemorate peace and to put more focus on cherishing peace and doing this exactly as Tali mentioned, through photography and theater and music. And I want to mention that this is something what Post-Conflict Research Center is going to be focusing a lot in the future, even if that is the core of our mission. Restoring the culture of peace is actually to give a more space and to try to speak more about peace and kind of like put attention on it to the youth generations, just to understand how valuable peace is and how much they can contribute. So I want to mention our Peace Festival and the Peace Magazine also as a larger idea, and the project we are doing, which will end up with building the Peace Museum, hopefully by the end of the year. But on another way, yes, we did work now with Paul and the city center, with the city mayor, Benjamina Kaj, the second female city mayor, which is for us extremely important. We had support by the city council and city mayor to organize this Sarajevo commemoration, and we decided we will, of course, it was quite natural, due through the photography, exhibition photography, the siege, by our dear friend and colleague and Professor Polo, who is also a big friend of our organization. And we did, as Paul mentioned, in Belgrade, had the young people who never heard about siege. They never had idea that siege actually took place in Sarajevo. But on another hand, in Sarajevo, we did this through incorporating a program, artistic program, where young people, youth, were reading the parts of war reports from the war journalists covering the siege in the different languages, using music, performing music at the opening, and organizing the educational conference day after about the legacy of Tribunal, and also incorporating young people promoting the Peace and Magazine together with the city mayor and the EU ambassador Sattler, who was actually the part of panel. So this is our way of incorporating the art and other ways of which we can use to bring young people to create a platform and actually allow them to film and photography, as Paul mentioned, and Tali also, how photography can be strong. In our case, photography and art have been the main tool for education, Eli mentioned his work regarding the people who were saving Jews during the Second World War. But our core project are Ordinary Heroes, featuring stories of moral courage and rescue behavior, not just from Bosnia, but from Rwanda, from Cambodia, Holocaust. And that is something what we are carrying to our organization, moral courage and rescue behavior. As Tali mentioned, we don't want to be a bystanders.
So these are like overlapping narratives, right? I mean, these are overlapping narratives between genocides, different countries, different languages, but similar experiences. First you, Vilma, and then Tali.
Yes, I mean, in our case, we did realize while we were featuring stories from other parts of the world that it was much more easier for Bosnian youth to connect. And in many cases, especially young people from Republika Srpska, when they would stand in the front of the portraits of those Serbs who were helping and saving some other like people, they would say that they actually feel proud for the first time, that they don't carrying this collective guiltness, even if they shouldn't carrying because it is not their fault. But they would say that they can see that it was something good during the war. And promoting these moral exemplars for us is not just through like Ordinary Heroes. You know, Tanya, we did this with preventing sexual violence in conflict, where we were featuring stories of women from Nepal and Congo. We always have some other context because we did realize that for youth, they can connect on a global level and they can speak more freely about the issue and problem if they actually see that it's a global and it's not just connected with their own experience.
Of course. And Tali, your comments on these overlapping narratives.
I think that Velma is absolutely right. It's actually much easier sometimes when your own past is very painful still, and you cannot touch it because it's like touching a wound, you know, a bleeding wound. It is easier to look at other histories and to find that connection. And I spoke a little bit about an entry point, and I think that many times, actually, Holocaust history is a good entry point, for example, to South Africans, because it's far removed. It happened in another continent, in another time. It's not connected to your own history.
It's distant.
Yes. Yet it's very human. It tells stories of human beings. So it's really about humanity and how to talk about choices, about dilemmas, about the us and them, about the identity, about all those issues that you speak about another history. And then you connect to your own. And that makes it very, very powerful and less threatening. And it works very, very well. Specifically in our country where racism, because of apartheid, was very much white, black. And suddenly when you learn about other conflicts where the perpetrators, victims were different, maybe Tutsi Hutu, or which are both blacks, or Jews, Germans, or whatever. It is opening a door that is very much closed and very set in a certain way of looking at issues. And it allows you a discussion, a dialogue, and then hopefully openness to look at your own history.
Thank you. I want to invite Dr. Cohen in because she has a comment and a question.
Well, I mean, the work everybody is doing is really tremendous. And I just wanted to point out that, often when we're talking about, especially in the case of Germany, we're talking about it from a governmental level, but we're also sometimes not remembering that those kinds of changes haven't necessarily happened within the families. So it's more than on one occasion. I have a close German friend whose parents are struggling with the war, the memories of the war, but whose grandfathers, on both sides, were in the Nazi party. And, discovering that they have family footage just sitting around, and that footage actually implicates them to a certain degree. And then the process of allowing the family to come and wrestle with that and then turn that footage over. So the work that everyone's doing with youth to expose this in the greater context of society then translates back into the family. and hopefully stimulates that conversation, or at least creates sort of more competency for young people to push back against that and set out on their own course to understand more.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And I would say from a personal standpoint, I worked in Bosnia for the OSCE mission immediately after the war for the first 4 years. And my German colleagues were the most astute and attuned to the issues of human rights. I was very much taken by them. I had 3 Germans on the communication staff that worked for me, and I learned a lot from them. So I do think that education, as has been discussed, is imperative and unfiltered in a way that can be availed to young people so that they can learn. And I would add, what's interesting here is that we're talking about people living in Bosnia and in the Western Balkans, but there are a lot of diaspora all over the world, and they left fleeing for their lives, and they may not even know. They may not even know everything, and certainly wouldn't necessarily, and some diaspora don't want to know. That it's just that painful. So I make that remark as somebody that has done some work with Bosnian diaspora and Kosovar diaspora here in the United States. Are there any other comments?
Could I maybe just step in a moment, Tanya?
Please.
So I really wanted to echo and build a little bit on what both Velma and Talia have been talking about there, about the role of art and more broadly culture as a space to operate within. We worked with the King's War Studies Department of my university and the LSE on a 3-year project looking at kind of taking a critical stance on the idea of reconciliation and questioning it, whether it's a useful term or not. But one of the things we did was look at the role of art in post-conflict society and how it might be a space for learning more about the other. And we had some really interesting conclusions. We commissioned a number of artists from the former Yugoslavia to make work in each other's countries, and I think that was a really interesting intervention. So Vladimir Danovich, for example, who's a very interesting Serbian artist who works with archival material from things like the ICTY tribunals and transcribes it very carefully to create these incredible documents. So he takes the dry, dead, and rather difficult to understand archival material and turns it into an artwork so people can kind of engage with it in the gallery space. He made work in the archives in Bosnia. And so by bringing him from Belgrade to Sarajevo to create work was a very powerful statement of, a Serbian acknowledging and bearing witness and paying testament to the suffering of the other. And so in our research, we found that art offers these kind of parallel spaces, if you like, in all sorts of different ways, where the sort of very difficult and contested spaces that are often quite dry and quite difficult to engage with at a political level, has a space where it can kind of thrive and alternative narratives can be presented and so on. And I think the thing that really struck me working with ex-Yugoslav artists was this sense that they have horizontally a lot more things that connect them through their past history than the vertical sort of forces of ethno-nationalism that divide them. I think these are the sort of levels that we can start to work on and construct connections across people rather than vertically. And I suppose one thing I'd like to promote actually, and in fact, I'm very interested to invite Tali and Ally to join into this project. We've just got new funding, which Velma knows about, to build a new network, which is called the Peace and Conflict Cultural Network, to bring together museums and sites of conscience and sites of peace and civil activists and artists in former Yugoslavia, Rwanda, Great Lakes, Lebanon, and the Latin American Colombia, to help them begin to share knowledge and experiences and kind of network and share knowledges. And, I was very inspired by Tali's speech there at the beginning about the role of the museum, which is exactly the sort of question that we're asking, is what is the role of museums in peace building? And we're hoping to be able to work in directly supporting museums. And I'm hoping we'll be able to work with Ali actually, because one of our key partners in that is the Imperial War Museum, who've just opened a brand new and very amazing Holocaust gallery, which is one of the best I've seen in terms of how to engage an audience and a viewer with these very difficult issues. So that's something looking forward that perhaps we can build on and try to work on. And I very much like to invite panelists and obviously anybody in the audience to join us on that journey, hopefully, and help us in that. So yes, thank you very much for this platform to talk about these things today.
It's really wonderful. I want to commend Ellie, you on your endeavor to recover people who saved others, and your documentation of that, reporting it to Yad Vashem. That's so important. And these stories and the people behind those stories, it's very it uplifts humanity. And so in that vein, recovering the history of the Jewish community in Bosnia, in Sarajevo, is very important. And I hope that you're going to be able to publish that and leverage that perhaps at the National Museum or whatever way you're going to do it.
Yes, first of all, allow me to say just a little bit about diaspora and the role of the diaspora that can have in our history, in our efforts to make, not just the Holocaust museum, but to teach people about Holocaust, about genocide, to give them more, and how we can involve them to be part of our actions. When I was in the United States and I spoke, I had some lecture in some mosque and in some university, and I realized that people, they have no idea about Holocaust. They don't know what happened actually during World War II, many of them. And I'm not talking about Bosnia, because many of them, I'm talking about when I had a lecture on Webster University in St. Louis, that nobody knows about Bosnia so much. They knew what happened during this recent war, but we are going to World War II or before, or anything other from the history of Bosnia, they have no idea about it. Actually, this is actually I think this is our fault, that we didn't make any effort, to explain people what happened here, how many people live there, how they mixed, how they live together, all of this, and they have no idea about our life, and they cannot imagine actually what there can be and what is it exactly. That's first of all, that I think that you have to think about how to come to diaspora, how to involve them, first of all, and how to push them, on the side of the right side, that they are coming and back to Bosnia and to help Bosnia on different ways. And first of all, that they can understand what happened here, not just during Holocaust, also during this recent war and after war and all what happened. Actually, that they have to be a part of it. This I think is very important. In my idea, how my researching and starting how to develop idea about Holocaust Museum, I'm also starting to talk about many of NGOs, that because they have so many members, they have so many, there is some organization, they have, another 10 organization, 15, 100 organization that they can include in our action. It's very important. I'm not talking about fundraising. That's also very important, because if we have a museum without money, it's nothing. But it's very important. First of all, include the people and organizations, and that everyone is ready to help and get all the possibilities to help in some different way, but help us to develop our idea about Holocaust Museum and about first of all teaching people. That's the idea, teaching young people what they have to do in the future.
Well, thank you very much, Ellie. I think that's going to have to be the last comment. I think this has been a very interesting discussion. And I would also say to all of you, because I know people sometimes get down, but I mean, as Andres pointed out, Paul's photographs are so incredible. And also Velma is producing several documentary films that document past crimes. And one expected out, you're putting one out on the siege of Sarajevo, right, Velma?
Yeah, I mean, first, which will come out on the 25th May, will actually commemorate.
That's right, on Tuzla, right?
Tuzla, but yes, there is one on siege, and so there are two going on.
Yeah, yeah.
One will be in May. Thank you so much for mentioning.
Yes, and you already did one on
Yes.
Vlasenica. So these are all really important. This is all these different modalities, as Paul has pointed out, on art. And I know that Velma's working in all these modalities, and Tali, what your points about peace education, and also Ellie's ideas about how bringing people together. I mean, that's just what it's all about. And sometimes when you're in the middle of it, you can't see, but I can tell you that standing here in New York City, I can see what you're doing. I am witnessing what you are doing, and you are very inspirational, and you are all to be congratulated and commended, because this is the moral question of our time. This is what we are confronted with in this moment, that we must stand up for the truth and tell the truth. And your documentation of it, whatever way you do it, is a rebuttal to denial and distortion. So I commend you. Laura, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to echo that. I was thinking about the panel this morning and talking about the challenges, even having these kinds of conversations. And I think what's so critical about memorialization and history museums is intertwining peace education and offering people a creative space to have these conversations, so that it isn't always, it's charged, but there's a creative outlook, and there's a way to also reach people through their hearts, as opposed to always just going through their mind. You know, photography acts as a way that you can have a reaction. So does being in the power of space. So thank you all for this conversation. I mean, I've learned a tremendous amount, and I'm just grateful to be a part of the dialogue.
Yes, and I will just also commend Velma and Paul for setting up an exhibit in Belgrade. That is so brave. I was actually concerned about Velma going there. I know I'm not a Pollyannish. I've been working in the region for 31 years, but I'm concerned about what's going on in Belgrade these days, and Serbia in general. So I commend you for doing this, because those people have never seen or heard anything. Bravo. So on that note, we are ending this really great conversation, this great constellation of people that are making a tremendous contribution to society. And I wish everyone well wherever you are. And I hope you have a great evening. And I look forward to seeing some of you soon. I will be in Sarajevo in July, my friends. I will be with you in Podachari.
Great. Looking forward to seeing you
Okay.
here, Tanya. Great.
Okay.
And thank you very much for
Yeah,
arranging all
welcome.
these events today. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody. All the best.
All the best. Thank
All
you.
the
See you
best.
in Sarajevo.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.